Let's hop on a ride-along when Clutch begins an impromptu undercover mission leading him closer to learning about a super weapon in development by Cobra Commander. Is this weapon big enough to destroy the Joes and take over the world? Let's find out in G.I. Joe number 3 from Image Comics and Skybound. See you in 3. Welcome back to Comical Opinions. This is our review of G.I. Joe number 3. Before we dig into the issue, how about a brief recap? When last we left the Joes in G.I. Joe number 2, Duke's team failed in its mission to protect a chunk of Cybertronian tech from being stolen by a Cobra strike team armed with Energon-enhanced laser weapons. If you want to know where that Cybertronian tech came from, check out the Transformers series, also from Image and Skybound. Rock and Roll paid the ultimate price for the team's failure, and the issue ended with Colonel Hawk bringing in a new Joe to replace Rock and Roll, much to Duke's chagrin. Meanwhile, Clutch took advantage of the chaos in the fight to infiltrate Cobra in disguise and accompany them back to the Cobra base. That brings us to the current issue. In G.I. Joe number 3, Cobra Commander's plans come into focus, sort of, not completely. The issue begins with Clutch sneaking his way through Cobra HQ to find a way to let the Joes know he's alive and gather any intel he can about what Cobra is planning. Disguised in tactical gear, Clutch runs into Mercer, but before Mercer can apply some painful discipline to who he thinks is a soldier who's just lazing about, Cobra Commander gathers the troops to lay out the next stage of his plan. What is that plan? Well, we find out, but not completely. Cobra Commander intends to assemble a unique invention that he has in design and development stages, but he needs the designs for a new component called a brainwave scanner, invented by Dr. Archibald Monev. Longtime G.I. Joe fans will recognize that civilian name as the character known as Dr. Venom. Cobra Commander pauses before divulging details when he senses a traitor in their midst. Clutch thinks his cover is blown and starts to back up, but all of a sudden one of the nearby scientists attacks Cobra Commander with a knife. The scientist is unmasked as an agent of Cobra Law, and he's disposed of accordingly. Back at the pit, which is G.I. Joe headquarters, Duke and Risk fight mano a mano. Colonel Hawk lets the fight continue as long as necessary so that the two Joes can accept each other, even if it's just out of service and nothing else. Suddenly, the fight is broken up by Stalker, who is more than tired of their childish behavior. Now, on cordial terms, sort of, the Joes assemble to examine the damaged energy weapons they found in the rubble of the explosion that Mercer set off to steal the Cybertronian tech. The gathered Joes come to the conclusion that the energy weapon is light years ahead of anything they could develop and reverse engineer. But suddenly, the examination is interrupted when CoverGirl receives a garbled transmission from Clutch, warning about the imminent kidnapping of Dr. Monev, while the scientist is transported to a hearing before Congress. The issue ends with a caravan being interrupted once, the same caravan being interrupted a second time, and 2 problems for the price of 1. And if you're familiar with G.I. Joe characters, that should give you a pretty big clue. Hey, do you want to be part of our growing community and get exclusive perks? Become a channel member today. By becoming a member, you'll support a channel you love, which is ours because everybody loves it, but you'll also gain access to special badges, emojis, and members-only content. Click the join button below to become part of our family and help us create more of the content you enjoy. Now let's get back to the review. And that's the issue, so let's talk about impressions, what worked, what didn't, etc. G.I. Joe number 3 is a strong issue that plays up the espionage aspects of G.I. Joe missions and gives readers plenty of fast-paced action to keep those pages turning. Joshua Williamson's take on the Joes lacks the military punch of a real American hero, but there's still a lot to like in this issue, and it's probably the strongest of the series so far. So let's switch gears and talk about the art for a second, and probably the biggest weak point of this entire issue. The art is just not strong enough to sustain the story that's being told, and that's by a wide margin. Tom Riley's slapdash inks look perfectly serviceable in some panels, and to be blunt, downright sloppy in others. Plus, Jordie Bellaire's muddy color choices and postmodernist application style seem designed to evoke a mid-century aesthetic. Okay, sure, we'll go with that, but the result is probably a little bit more on the ugly side than the stylized side, which is what I think the art team was going for. Some people are going to love the way this comic looks, and I'm with you on that, and that's fine. Everybody has their tastes. But for me, if you're going to put this up against a real American hero, which is always the high bar, it just doesn't stand up. It feels garish and a bit tacky. So let's switch over to the positives and negatives, starting with what's great about G.I. Joe number 3. Joshua Williamson's arc, despite a clunky start, and we weren't particularly great fans of issue number 1, it was okay, but just didn't blow you away in any stretch, is starting to find its stride in how the story is shaping up. The rapid pace, theatrical action, and intriguing developments work together to keep you interested in what's happening. As a plus, Cobra Commander's coy mystery about what he's inventing is interesting, not because he's keeping it secret just for the sake of it, but because his reasons behind the lack of transparency make sense for the character and for the situation. So sometimes you get frustrated by a mystery that doesn't give you enough breadcrumbs, and you're like, okay, so when are you going to reveal it? Why are you making a big deal out of it? In this case, keeping it hidden sort of makes sense, and that adds to the mystery. So let's switch over to the negatives and what's not great about G.I. Joe number 3. At the risk of sounding like a broken record, by far the biggest problem with this issue is the art. It's mediocre enough that the satisfaction level of this comic is harmed by it, which is not something you want to see. It's unclear if Tom Riley and Jordi Belair are short on time and they kind of had to rush through some things, but something needs to change, and it needs to change fast to kind of get people more excited about this issue. Comics are a visual medium. You have to have great visuals. In my opinion, the visuals in this comic are not good. Now, I've often stated on more than one occasion that you can have a really great story with mediocre art and you still have a great comic book. But in this case, Joshua Williamson's script is good, but it's not great. So to overcome the mediocre art, you have to have a great story. By virtue of the script not being great, the art is actively harming it. So this is one of those situations where even though the writing is better than the art, it's not so much better that it can overcome the mediocre art. And that's why you're getting a little bit of a down turn in the score. Let's take a step back and look at the big picture. As with the other interconnected Energon issues, all signs point to an impending crossover between G.I. Joe and the Transformers. With each passing issue, the two properties start to overlap each other in their narratives and the individual scenes that are happening. That said, no formal date has been announced as to when a crossover will occur. For now, G.I. Joe is feasting on Transformers crumbs because the nature of the overlap definitely is more on the Transformer side than the G.I. Joe side. So final thoughts, what do we think about G.I. Joe number 3 from Image Comics and Skybound? It's a fast-paced, entertaining issue that relies heavily on espionage and intrigue to stop Cobra Commander from building what we'll for now call a superweapon. Joshua Williamson's script is well-paced and focused, improving significantly from issue number 1's bumpy start. Sadly, though, the art is rough enough to be off-putting and to drag the score down. The story is good, the art is not. Therefore, G.I. Joe number 3 earns a 7 out of 10. This is a decent issue. I like where the story is headed, but they've got to do something about the art. The story is being actively harmed by it, and that's not a good place. We wanted to do better. They've got to do a little bit better. But what do you think? Is this your favorite new release of the interconnected Energon universe among all the different G.I. Joe titles? That includes the miniseries for Scarlet, Destro, Duke, and what have you. Leave a thumbs up if you found this review helpful, and drop a comment below with which G.I. Joe series so far has been your favorite, and whether or not you like the new G.I. Joe series that we're reviewing here, or if you still favor the original Real American Hero, which is ongoing in its separate universe. Also, remember to click on the link in the description to read the written review and check out the variant covers as well as the preview pages, and buy this comic to help support the channel. Your support, of course, is greatly appreciated. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button down below if you're watching this on YouTube. So thank you very much for joining, and stay tuned through the outro for more reviews just like this one.